everybody, this is Julie again, and we're back with another video in our series, Listen Up, Church Finance. And we're continuing our conversation with Robert Wise, who is our outside insurance consultant for the New Jersey Ministry Network. And today we're going to be talking about something that I know is not a lot of fun, and most of us, including myself, really don't like this at all, and this is workers' compensation insurance. I know, it's like saying a bad word, because it is mandatory, as you know. It feels kind of like a tax. It feels like, why do we have to do this? And so I've asked Rob to come and join us again here today for another video. This one is going to be looking at really kind of trying to demystify workers' comp. So Rob, take it away.
Excellent.
Tell us everything we need to know about workers' comp.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me talk about workers' compensation. It's actually an age-old topic, believe it or not.
Wow.
If you look at history, 4,000 years ago, even back in the Sumerian age, they had workers' compensation. And even the pirates, if you got hurt on a pirate ship, you had a schedule by which if you lost one thumb, you'd get so much money, two fingers, so much money.
Wow.
So there you go.
And I bet they hated it back then, too.
I'm sure they did hate it back then, but it's definitely feels like a tax. That's a great description. Churches sometimes struggle with what to do with it, and some of that comes just from not understanding how it's put together, not understanding who to include, who not to include, and at the end of it all, as a bonus, you get an audit. So that's never fun.
No.
But I think the thing to probably put out there at the beginning is if a church can embrace it as a benefit, we go through great lengths to try to provide benefits to our employees, to the people that help us and work for us. And workers' compensation is exactly that. In fact, if you look at what it provides, the benefits it provides would be lost wages, medical expense, rehabilitation expense. If you had a death, it could be payment to their dependents and also even funeral expenses.
Wow.
So it's quite broad in what it covers. And the state of New Jersey is on their game. They're making sure everyone is participating because it is mandatory. And it's something that, probably not to toy with too much. Just to give you an example, if someone were to not purchase, if a church or a nonprofit were to not purchase workers' compensation in New Jersey, they can be fined $1,000 a day for the first 30 days.
Wow.
And it gets worse from there, even up to 18 months in jail.
Boy, you'd have to take up a big offering to cover that.
Yeah, so it's probably easier just to put it in place.
Right, exactly.
And the thing that when we sit with boards, we serve thousands of churches throughout the Northeast, and when we sit with a board, and we're talking about this coverage, we put it in the angle of taking care of the pastor's family, and really making that if a really tragic event occurred, the church could bridge the gap during that time period, because they will have to be paying the pastor who was injured. They will also have to probably bring in outside help to do during that time. And so the budget gets out of whack. And if you're able to have a policy that responds, does it well, and keeps that family afloat while the church brings the ministry along, it's a better ending story that way.
Right.
And when boards start to put in that perspective, it seems to be a little more easy to swallow on that side of things. But it is a unique coverage in that you have to have it. A lot of coverages you can choose not to, but this one, it's got to be in place.
Right. So when you were speaking about helping the family through this situation while the injured person recovers, can you give me a little bit of information about what the benefit is? Like how much could an employee expect to receive if they are injured?
Excellent. Yeah, in New Jersey, it's 70% of their weekly wage, up to a maximum, and the maximum would be up to $903.
Okay.
That number goes up every year, so that's for 2018. It's up to $903.
Okay.
And that can be paid for quite a long period of time. There's a schedule of how the injury gets evaluated, but to encapsulate it, that could be paid for over 400 weeks. That someone would have access to that. And that's going to help them get through, during that time period. If a church were to go out and bring in some, benefits consultant to come in and put together disability policies on everybody, the cost would be a lot. And every disability policy actually has a limitation of which it will pay out, whereas workers' comp doesn't really have a limitation.
Right, and one of the things too that I just want to make sure our churches are aware of is that in the state of New Jersey, churches are automatically exempted from the state-run disability program. You can voluntarily opt in, but workers' comp is one way to cover at least one, one class of, I guess, occurrences. Without having to opt into the New Jersey disability program. So it's important that churches know that.
Yes, yeah, it's a...
and this is not optional anyway, so you need to do something.
Yeah, so you can do it with a smile.
Right, that's right.
I'm not sure, but it's an important coverage. It's very much a part of keeping a ministry, the perpetuation plan of a ministry. And injuries do occur. As the other frustration I think that churches might have is, where does the price come from?
Right.
And the price really comes from a very straightforward calculation where you take basically the total compensation of all your staff, you divide it by 100, and you multiply that times a rate. And the rate changes by class code. So your various employees are put in these class codes. And it varies by maybe how dangerous what they do. As I say dangerous, but it's more like how likely to get injured. So your janitor might be in one class, and then your pastor might be in another. And by doing that, you put that through the calculation, and there's the price. So churches can really know what they're going to pay. And it's pretty important to try to have that as accurate as possible, because there is an audit at the end, as we mentioned. And the audit would pick up if it was underpaid. It also picks up if you overpaid, and will give something back to the church if you overpaid that.
Right.
So that it's kind of just an evening out effect at the end of the policy.
Right. So even office workers, we had a situation here at the network offices where one of our staff opened up her desk drawer, and there was a paper clip in there. And I don't know if you've ever taken a paper clip and sort of bent it, when you're talking and you need something to do with your hands. Well, this paper clip got wedged in her desk drawer, and when she opened it up, that thing flipped out and stabbed her in the eye.
Oh my goodness.
So I know it's like, don't need to laugh. And by the way, she's fine. But that was something that fell within the coverage of our workers' comp insurance, and we're happy that we had it, because our medical insurance wouldn't have, she would have been out of pocket for her deductible and all this other kind of stuff. So even though this is mandatory, and even though you might think, we're a church, we're an office, we don't really have these things, you never know what can happen.
It is true. I mean, to your point about the cost of the health insurance, when you go to a hospital, it's one of the first questions they ask, did this happen on the job?
Right.
The health insurance companies are very good about ferreting out what's workers' comp and what's not. So that's really to the benefit, because once it goes into workers' comp, it's not hitting that person's personal health insurance. The other side of it too is, because we do this all the time, I see churches every day, thousands of churches, the injuries really can be severe. And we, the pastoral work isn't probably thought of as high risk, and it's not. But we've had pastors, get shot.
Wow.
Drive by. We've had a pastor fall off the roof. Up doing leaves. Pastor was changing the light bulb off a step ladder. Car accidents. That's probably the most common. They're out doing their jobs, and boom, they get in a car accident. And these are ones that are keeping pastors out for a year or more of their work. And it is part of it, and it is real. So thankfully, workers' comp can kind of address that full spectrum of type of injury, from something smaller to something extreme.
Right, and I've also heard, sort of switching topics here a minute, I've heard that there's a lot of paperwork and that you get audited, and explain to me how that works.
Sure. So at the end of your policy period, if it's a smaller policy, smaller church, typically the company's going to just mail you out a form, and on that form it's going to have to list the employees, kind of payroll information, kind of classifying them. It'll go through a couple other questions. It's going to bring up the idea of how did the church treat subcontractors, which is an important kind of piece of that, and the church will fill that out and then return it. If it's a larger church or a larger policy, they will come out and visit face-to-face. My advice there is to work with the auditor. A lot of times they're very good people. They know the church business, if you will, and can help you in getting through that audit. But with that audit, going back to how to treat employees, you're wanting to make sure you have the roles clear, including those subcontractors. That's a piece that if the church is using subcontractors that are not carrying their own workers' compensation coverage, that portion or that job value is going to get put onto the church.
So the church would actually have to pay for the workers' comp coverage of an outside person if they don't have their own coverage?
That's correct.
Wow, that's important to know.
So because in New Jersey everyone is supposed to have their own coverage, if they don't, when the relationship occurs where you're hiring the other person, even as a subcontractor, you take on that responsibility unintentionally, obviously. So you want to show that they did have coverage in place. And you do that through having a certificate get sent to you, which would be from their agent that's signed, showing the dates that they have coverage, that they do have it, or even a copy of the declaration pages of their policy, just proving that they had it. Because the rates are very different. We mentioned the janitor versus the pastor. Well, we put the pastor against a roofer. A pastor's rate is probably around 50, 60 cents per 100. The roofer's about $26 per 100.
Wow.
So that coming on the church could be a real burden.
Yeah, you really don't want that.
Yeah, you don't want that to happen. So the other kind of nuance there for churches is speakers. And we've had discussions about this where you're 1099ing a speaker. In those cases, those speakers are covered by other plans elsewhere, and you want to make sure with the auditor you're clarifying that.
So they don't include that.
So they don't want to include that because it's typically an honorarium given to them in that way. So definitely have those discussions, clarify what's included there, but definitely be aware when it's construction-related outside subcontractors to make sure they have coverage in place.
Right. And what about other volunteers?
Volunteer coverage is gray, and it can be handled in two ways. You can have an accident policy put in place. So if you're doing trips, whether that be youth trips or Habitat for Humanity, mission trips, etc., volunteers can be covered that way. It's really not, workers' compensation is not intended to pick them up, but the definition of an employee for the Workers' Compensation Board of New Jersey is much broader than the definition of the IRS.
Okay.
So it can, if there is a relationship where someone is doing something for the church and doing it on a consistent basis, only doing it for the church, and even if the church is just giving them gift cards to go out to eat or something like that, that could be deemed if they were to get injured, that could be deemed a employee-employer relationship, and that would be on there. So again, at the time of audit, talking through that, clearly churches are driven with volunteer work and volunteer effort. There's no way to really put all of them on there, nor do I think does a church want to do that. But just be aware that it can create that relationship, and in some cases we have seen it where that was able to be picked up. But that's kind of where it stands. Is if you really want to make sure that they're covered, I would suggest that accident policy that is very clearly delineating that, versus having to kind of go through this research project of an injury when everyone's tense.
Right. So, for example, if you have a volunteer, a member of your church who comes in every week just as a favor to the church and cuts the grass, and again, that's a situation where they could, easily get hurt. You would recommend purchasing a separate accident policy for that person?
You could do that. There's a way to do it that way, or as I mentioned, it could get picked up on workers' comp if the injury went there, and we've seen that happens. So it's something to be aware of. Everyone wants to kind of use that quick 1099 as proof we're not an employer, but it's a little more nuanced than that.
Right, exactly. And certainly we wouldn't want to be put in a position, and we wouldn't want to put a volunteer in a position where they did get hurt and they had no other recourse but to sue the church because there was no other coverage.
Right.
So we certainly don't want to be in that kind of position.
Yeah, a lot of the church insurance companies also have it's a very unique coverage, and it's lost wages, and it's for that particular thing where they will. So they don't have to sue. It's not going against workers' comp, but if it's an injury of probably a smaller size, there's typically a lost wages coverage that could get triggered and put into place to solve that. But if it's a tragic injury, that probably would not be enough.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your help and your expertise in this area, Rob. And I just want to let you guys know that there's a couple of links associated with this video where Rob has put together some more of the technical information that you might need, some of the schedules of, who's considered an employee and, what their potential coverage might be and the potential cost to the church. So thanks again, Rob, for being here with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And stay tuned. We've got more coming up in this series on risk management.